I'm going to start off with a little audience participation. I know we all love that. Raise your hand if you remember your first online purchase. Okay, not many people. Maybe there have just been too many purchases. Raise your hand if you ever had a bad online experience that broke your trust in a company. Okay, a lot more hands. And keep your hand up or raise it again if that experience caused you to shop with a company less or to stop shopping with them altogether. All right. Now raise your hand if anyone at your organization is measuring trust. Okay, we have a couple hands, not that many, hopefully more up to date. So I don't remember my first online purchase like many of you, but I do remember a colleague telling me about his first online purchase. It was a book from a new website, and maybe you've heard of them, Amazon. So I'm dating myself a little bit. These were the early days of e-commerce when many companies were unknown quantities, and we actually instructed the customers on the shopping process. You can actually see that link right there. But not only that, back then trusting your site with a credit card and your personal information was a very big deal. And Amazon devoted a significant amount of space to safety and privacy issues. But we've come a long way since then. I still say it's relevant to consider trust. And if you don't believe me, just Google online prom fail. If you've seen these before, very, very bad things. These are, of course, prom dresses. So young people who've grown up with the internet and e-commerce are learning the hard way. The old adage still applies, buyer beware. And of course, trust is so much more than shopping. No problem. Here. So trust is much more than shopping. We trust the internet for the information that we receive, as well as how, for our information, how it's being used and how it's being secured. And so, stepping back even further, researchers who study trust at the macro level tell us that trust in institutions such as government and media is declining at an all-time low. What's more, we have a trust gap within various segments of our society, with older people trusting more than younger people, not due just to age, but to their generational cohort. And we have more educated people trusting more than the mass population. And businesses aren't immune to this trust decline. In a study by Cognizant, they note that 57% of people will stop doing business with a company that has broken their trust, like the audience today, and 40% plan to switch to a competitor due to a trust issue. And trustworthiness is not just a subjective opinion, it's a competitive advantage. 2 studies found that high trust companies outperform in terms of their stock price within their sector by 5%. And in another study, the top 10 most trustworthy public companies outperformed the S&P 500. And in a recent study by Accenture that included over 7,000 companies, they found that trust incidents are on the rise. So 54% of the companies in their research experienced a trust incident in the last 2.5 years. Even more alarming, when there's a decline in trust or a trust-related incident, revenue is also generally going to decline afterwards. And their model estimates that amount to be $180 billion. So trust is a very, very big deal. What's more, today we have very public trust events that are more visible than ever before, and they have the potential to go viral. And that's due to social media, the proliferation of blogs, the 24/7 media cycle. So Accenture claims when it comes to trust, it's not a matter of if, but when, and we need to be prepared and we need to be measuring it. So I've just given you a broad justification for the importance of trust. But why, as UX professionals, should we be concerned with trust? Well, first and foremost, we are experts in user behavior, so I think we're uniquely qualified to measure trust at our organizations, and we really should be leading the way. Today, my colleague Ling and I will tell you, of course, how we're measuring trust in one part of our organization, Groupon's online ratings and review platform, and we're using a scale to do that. Now, you might think a scale is purely a quantitative method, but you'd be wrong. We use qualitative research to inform our scale, and we use qualitative techniques to make the development process better. And furthermore, after we've developed our scale, we can use qualitative follow-up research based on what we learn. So we'll show you how that all works, and we really wholeheartedly encourage all researchers in the audience to think about employing these type of methods within your organization. So for the remainder of the talk, we'll let you know why we chose trust as a key metric and why the traditional metrics that we collect wasn't really sufficient for our goals. We'll also deep dive on how we measure trust and how we're applying it, and also that this approach can be used to measure more than just trust, but other sentiment measures as well. And then we'll encourage you to think about how you can really push the thinking in your organization and help them take a broader perspective. So now Ling's going to talk about why we measure trust for Groupon's ratings and reviews.
So earlier in 2018, we were working on Groupon's ratings and reviews. As you can see on the right here, the review experience at the time was really poor. We only allowed users to see 3 positive reviews. If they wanted to see more reviews, if they wanted to see the negative ones, they couldn't. Also, the reviews, yeah, I know. The reviews displayed there were just too brief to be even believable. Like if you were used to reading all the elaborate Yelp reviews, the one-sentence Groupon review just seemed kind of fake. And oftentimes, all it says is good service, awesome, we'll be back, which didn't tell you any useful insights to make a purchase decision. On top of that, users are not sure where all those reviews were from. Were they from actual Groupon customers? Were they written by bots? Did Groupon employees make up some of them? They were not clear. As a result, they didn't trust our ratings and reviews. In qualitative studies, we hear quotes like this all the time. Before I decide to buy a deal, I always go to Yelp or Google to look up the reviews there. The lack of trust not only made the experience very laborious for our users, as they have to constantly flipping back and forth between Groupon and Google or Yelp, but it also had negative impact on the business. Because when they went to another site or another app, they can get distracted, or they may find a better deal elsewhere. And then they can totally abandon the shopping session on Groupon. So in response to all these problems, the product team put together a whole roadmap in addressing trust. And one of the first things we decided to do was to allow users to see all reviews. Very logical thing, right? And that's just meeting the very basic expectations anyone would have for ratings and reviews platform. However, when we A/B tested this, the conversion went down significantly. And just like any other companies, we have our financial objectives, we have our key performance metric, and usually a feature can get rolled out if they have negative impact on conversion. But in this case, we felt strongly that allowing users to see all reviews was the right thing to do, because it's going to help them make a more informed decision. It's going to make the experience a lot better, and ultimately it will lead to more purchases. It's going to be good for the business. However, that kind of impact's just not getting captured in conversion. And what conversion does, it's really great at giving us this indication about the short-term impact. When you do A/B experimentation, you know how much impact this feature will have on the business during the time of experimentation, right? But what we don't know is that if this kind of impact is going to sustain post-experimentation. And that is extremely important in this case, the CO reviews. Just think about it. If you hide the negative reviews, you may get some users to purchase the deals during the time of experimentation, because they may overlook the fact that we only showed them 3 positive ones. But then 1 month or 3 months down the road, when they go actually use the deal, they may find the experience was really different from what they imagined or what they have read from the reviews. At that point, they're going to lose trust on our ratings and reviews platform, or even worse, they may lose trust on our business as a whole and not come back with us. So we thought, well, if we believe that trust is the thing we should improve, and that's going to lead us to long-term success, we need to measure trust. And that's so much easier said than done. So how did we measure trust, right? After all, trust is this subjective, intangible, fuzzy thing that it's hard to grasp. And you can't just easily attach a behavioral metric to trust and call it a done. So here we apply psychometrics in measuring trust, and psychometrics is a well-developed field. It has a long history of being used in fields such as education, psychology, and management to measure things such as knowledge, attitudes, and personality traits. And what it is that it's a rigorous scale development process that break down a latent construct such as extroversion, self-control, and depression into a set of valid and reliable measures. And that's really relevant to us as UX practitioners because we are often dealing with the fuzzy things like confidence, serendipity, satisfaction, or trust. And if we want to know the changes in our product, the tweaks in our algorithms are in fact improving those things, we need to find a way to measure them. At this point, some of you may be thinking, why is she making this so complicated? Can we just ask users how much do they trust us? Well, we can't, not quite, for two reasons. One is that trust, along with other latent constructs, has numerous subjective meanings packed into it. Let's take this question as an example. When you ask users how much do you trust Groupon's ratings and reviews, some of them are going to interpret this question as we're asking them how much do they think the reviewers are providing truthful accounts of their experience, while others may think we're asking them how much do they think the reviews are a true reflection of that experience. They seem very similar, but they are different. So I can believe a reviewer is being honest, but I may think he or she has a totally different standard compared to me. Therefore, I don't think the review is a true reflection of that experience. So before we can measure trust, we have to first unpack trust and get everybody on the same page on what trust really means. And the second reason is that as human beings, we often lack the necessary self-insight that psychometric scale provides. And if we didn't, there wouldn't be this multi-billion-dollar industry surrounding around psychological assessment, right? I'm sure a lot of you have taken a Myers-Briggs personality test and trying to figure out whether you are INTP or ENFJ. So before we deep dive into how we did it, I just want to preface that this is not an easy approach. It's not quick, it's time consuming, it's labor intensive. It's not right for every single project. And also, if you don't have any experience in scale development, we recommend you working with experts on this. And we did that too. We didn't do this alone. So our goal here is twofold. One, we want to describe this process in as straightforward manner as possible, so you can decide when is the right time to incorporate this in your organization. And second, we just want to call out the important role qualitative research play in this process of creating precise measures. After all, you can't measure things if you don't understand it.
All right. So today, we're not going to be overly jargony. We're going to actually use a metaphor to explain the scale development process. And you can think of creating a psychometric scale as creating a custom-made garment of your choice, a very high-end garment. Today, we're going to talk about a tuxedo. And by following this process, you really could make any type of garment, such as this high-end jacket or this lovely gown, just like you could make any type of measure, such as satisfaction, serendipity, and of course, our trust scale. So it's a 4-step process, and the first step involves conceptualization. So getting back to our tuxedo, you want to first start by defining the key aspects of your tuxedo. And that can include things like your choice of fabric, their quality and weight? Are you going to use wool versus synthetic? And you might want to sketch out what your garment's going to look like so you can think about the cut and the style of the tuxedo. And similarly, when you're building a trust scale, you want to understand the specific context. So in our case, Groupon's ratings and reviews. And you want to then identify the key aspects as well so that you can create a conceptual model. So this is really a critical step because there's no statistical correction that can fix poorly written questions or poorly built model. So you really want to take your time with this step. Getting back to our tuxedo, let's say we forgot the buckram, which is the canvas interfacing material that allows the lapel to keep its shape. Without it, the lapel starts to ripple and fall down, and in order to fix it, you would have to open the jacket up again and start the process. Now, there is some amount of flexibility with this approach, but again, if you miss a major component or dimension, that might require you to restart the process as well. So what did our model look like? Here it is on the right, and as you can see, Groupon's trust in, general trust, in Groupon's ratings and reviews was broken down into two dimensions, trust in reviewers and trust in Groupon. And then each of those dimensions have the same three sub-dimensions, competence, integrity, and benevolence. So how do we get to this model? Well, first we did a literature review, and there we didn't find specific information to trust in ratings and reviews, but we did find a fair bit of literature on trust in e-commerce. And so that was really helpful for us in defining the model, and that's where we learned about the importance of competence, integrity, and benevolence. And of course, we did exploratory research, which Ling just presented to you, to really better understand trust, because trust is very different when you're talking about interpersonal trust versus trust in a company versus trust in a company's ratings and reviews platforms. So it was really important for us to understand the Groupon-specific context, and that also informed our model, as well as the next step, which is to develop a questionnaire. So returning to our metaphor, this involves gathering all the fabric and notions, which is similar to writing an exhaustive list of scale items. And again, we want to make sure that things are properly written because we can't use statistics to compensate for this or any errors here. And the real goal is breadth and depth and to write as many items as possible. That is because the subsequent steps involve having psychometric experts and statistical tests to cut out questions in the scale. And your final scale will be much shorter than what you start with. So in our case, we wrote 130 items. And then at the end, which is roughly 15 to 20 per dimension in our model. And then at the end, we ended up with 12 items in total, 4 per dimension. So how do you generate all of those items? We took 2 approaches. One was that we adapted items from existing scales, and then we used our exploratory research to also generate some additional items. So when you're doing your literature review, you're likely going to encounter other scales, and we did encounter other trust scales. And it's a great source of items where you can adapt questions from their scale and incorporate them into yours. So I'll give you an example of one we found, which was Amazon keeps its customers' best interests in mind during most transactions. And we modified that slightly and adapted it to say, Groupon operates its ratings and reviews platform with its customers' best interests in mind. But adapting questions will only get you so far. You really do need to understand the specific context. So we did this by interviewing our customers to learn more about the specific pain points and attitudes and beliefs that they had while shopping and engaging with our platform. And that was basically helped us to generate questions that we could not have adapted from other surveys because they were specific to our platform. Just want to point out two things about this stage. Of course, you want to continue using all the best practices for survey writing, but also in this process, you want to have a certain amount of redundancy in your items. It's typically not what you do. So two examples are on the right. The people who rate and review offers at Groupon are spot on with their assessment, and the people who rate and review offers on Groupon provide useful insights. You can see how they're somewhat similar. And the reason for this redundancy is it boosts reliability. So moving on to the third step, which is content validity. And content validity is the degree to which a particular survey item represents its intended construct dimension. So for example, we have perceived reviewers' competence, that's one of our dimensions. And we wrote this statement, which I actually presented to you just a moment ago. The people who rate and review offers on Groupon provide useful insights. So when we wrote this statement, we thought it reflected reviewers' competence. The question is, does it truly reflect that? And so, oops, went in the wrong direction. And so in order to determine this, we had expert reviewers assess our questions, and we also tested our questions. So you can think about this back into our metaphor as similar to having a master tailor evaluate your choice of fabrics. So say you want to create a really high-end luxury tuxedo, you want to construct it out of wool and satin. Your master tailor would basically look at your choices of fabrics and let them know if they're appropriate for your goals. So what does that look like in practice? Well, we did two things. One, we usability tested our questions on usertesting.com. We recruited Groupon customers, and we basically just wanted to make sure that when they read these statements, they understood them as we had intended them. And so we just asked them to rephrase these statements in their own words. Now, it's not necessary to do that on all 130 questions. We worked with our team that includes content strategy, and we looked at the ones that we thought would be the most confusing or the ones that would maybe insert some Groupon speak, and just wanted to make sure that they were understood by our users. And then next, we actually got into the formal content validity assessment. And so what we did was we had psychometric experts who were psychology graduate students who had specifically been trained in psychometrics, and they evaluated our questions. So the first step is we had to teach them about our model of trust because they're not trust experts. And then once they were knowledgeable about that, we asked them to take each individual statement and to assign it to a single dimension on the model. And additionally, we asked them to rate the relevancy of the item to its assigned dimension. So you can think of this as sort of like a closed card sort activity where people are bucketing the items into different dimension groups. And only the items that had 70% inter-rater reliability or a mean score of 4 out of 5 made it to the actual survey. So in this process, we cut down from 130 questions to about 58 questions, roughly 8 per dimension.
So the 3 steps Nicole just walked you through, those are all based on theory, based on our own hypothesis, right? If you think about it, it's according to the literature review we did or the exploratory research we conducted. We're telling you we think that trust can be broken into 2 dimensions, and then within each there's 3 sub-dimensions, and then we generated 58 survey items that we think are measuring trust. But we don't know if that theory is accurate. We don't know if that 58 survey items are indeed measuring trust. And do we need that 58 survey items after all, right? So this is the step we actually put our theory into test. We will use data to tell us, to get us at a set of survey measures that's actually a valid and reliable measure for trust, and refine our questionnaire throughout this step. So you can kind of think of this as cutting and draping fabric and trying this tuxedo prototype on a real person to figure out the fit of this tuxedo and the dimensions of this tuxedo. So there are two goals here. One is we want to evaluate our initial theory to see if it's accurate and refine it based on data. And second is that we want to trim down the survey items that are least related or not related to the underlying construct, here trust. So how did we do that? First, we grabbed that 58 survey items and put it into a questionnaire, and then we send it to Groupon customers, our population of interest. And on the right here, you can get a glimpse at what the survey looks like. Basically, we just ask users how much do they agree or disagree with all these 58 survey statements and have them rate on a 5-point Likert scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And we got 260 responses in this round of data collection. And what we did with the data analysis is that we applied exploratory factor analysis to understand the correlational patterns among those survey items. It sounds very technical, but conceptually, you can kind of think of this as doing affinity diagramming with the qualitative data and trying to find clusters and patterns among the data. Here, you're trying to find which survey items kind of tend to hand together and then identify those factors, dimensions, or themes, if you will. One thing to note, though, is that exploratory factor analysis can help you spot the patterns, but what it doesn't do is to help you interpret the patterns. And here again is the moment you will need to leverage your qualitative insights, the knowledge you gain from the literature review to help you make sense of it. And here we were able to label those three clusters as trusting content, trusting reviewer, and trusting Groupon. And that's a little bit different from the initial model we identified. There's one more dimension emerged, that's trusting content. And also throughout this analysis, once we have the pattern identified, we can see which survey items are not related to those three dimensions and which survey items are cross-loaded into multiple dimensions and cut those out. So now we have our 15-item survey measure, much shorter than the 58 we started. But our work isn't done yet, because here the pattern kind of emerged from the 260 responses, right? We don't know if this pattern is going to scale as we collect more data. So it's important to do at least one more round of data collection. So here we put that 15 survey items into another questionnaire and send it to Groupon customers. And this time we applied confirmatory factor analysis, a top-down approach, where here we're really trying to examine and evaluate if the correlational structure identified through the exploratory factor analysis actually adequately fits the new data set. And also, we're able to further trim down one survey item per dimension and get a more precise measure. So, ta-da, here is our tuxedo, and also our 12-item scale for measuring trust in Groupon's ratings and reviews. And we have 3 dimensions embedded in it. So if you compare this to that one question, how much do you trust Groupon's ratings and reviews? This is not only going to give you more accurate understanding of trust, but it's also going to give you more actionable insights. You're going to see like whether our company is lagging behind in trusting reviewers or trusting Groupon or trusting content. And the product team can take specific actions based on the survey responses. So a quick recap here. We went through 4 steps. We started with conceptualization, then we developed questionnaire, we assessed the content validity, and finally we applied factor analysis to establish construct validity and refine that questionnaire. I just want to call out here that qualitative research played an important role throughout. We started this process with qualitative research that totally informed our model of trust, our definition of those dimensions, and our generation of those survey items. And then in the content validity stage, we applied qualitative techniques like usability testing, like closed cursor activities to help us make sure we're translating that dimension to the set of survey items correctly, accurately. And lastly, even in this the most quant-driven process, we again applied qualitative research to help us to interpret a pattern emerged from exploratory factor analysis. So now that we have the scale, we spent so much time, so much effort creating it, how can we make the best out of this? And we are still in the early stage of applying the scale, but we have identified 5 areas or 5 next steps. The first thing you need to do is to really understand the nomological networks surrounding the construct you are measuring. It's not meaningful to just measure something out of a vacuum. It's important to understand what are some of the antecedents that influence your construct. In this case, it can be general trust in Groupon. It could be their past interaction, their experiences with Groupon. And also, how does this construct influence the people's intention and their behavioral outcomes, right? How does this tie to the behaviors the organization care about, such as number of purchases people make, the reviews, number of reviews they provide, and that cross-referencing behavior we talked about earlier. And the next thing is we need to connect the trust measure to the business metrics. If you think about it, when you run an A/B experimentation, you can get a result like the feature raised 3% in trust, but decreased 2% in conversion. But then what do? Do you roll out this feature because 3 is bigger than 2? Of course not, right? So then it's important to connect the trust to the business metrics. And we can do that by identifying a middle variable, in this case, a behavioral outcome, to tie trust to conversion. And because this measure is very specific and very nuanced, we can use this as a diagnostic tool to help us understanding which area the company is lagging behind in terms of trust, and really act on those areas. And again, this is the time we can circle back with qualitative research to understand why we're getting rated low on a specific dimension and what we can do to improve upon it. We can also use this tool as a way to benchmark ourselves against our competitors. Even though the scale is created for trust in Groupon's ratings and reviews specifically, but we can extend it to other similar contexts like e-commerce. And we can also triangulate that kind of benchmarking data with the competitive analysis to really understand what our competitors are doing well in driving trust. Lastly, we can use this scale to develop catered product strategy. We can slice and dice the data in so many different ways. We can understand if new users tend to trust Groupon's ratings and reviews differently compared to existing users, if there are any onboarding features we need to create, and also if users typically shop in the travel vertical tend to trust us differently compared to people who shop on the restaurant vertical, and to create a more customized experience depending on vertical.
So today we've told you about the strategic advantage that trustworthy companies have. And of course, we've provided you a robust way to measure trust. But I'll let you in on a little secret. When we started this project, we didn't know very much about trust or its benefit on the bottom line. We just knew that our customers were having a bad experience, and there was a tension between our improving that experience and conversion. So we had to step back, take a broader perspective, and do what we always do in UX, advocate strongly for our user. And this ultimately led us to trust. So how do you take that broader perspective? As we mentioned before, often when we're working on a product or a new feature, we're really thinking about success, how we define it, how we measure it, and that's important. But as we mentioned before, that's only one piece of the puzzle. And often when you're thinking about success, you're thinking about conversion, you're thinking about other financial metrics like refund rate, and you're thinking about page interactions and clicks. And we really need to reframe that perspective. So what if we asked a related but slightly different question of what does it mean to win with our customers? From that perspective, we can talk more about the relationships we're building. It's not just a matter of selling more short term. It's really thinking about the long run. And of course, that does impact things like customer lifetime value. So what does winning look like? Well, always Tiffany Haddish, who, if you don't know, is a real-life power user, and she's also turned into Groupon's celebrity spokesperson. She's a very strong advocate of ours. And so when you think about winning, you think about engaged customers, delighted, excited customers, and of course they trust us. And our best customers are brand ambassadors, even if they're not being formally contracted to be so. So we encourage you to really take a similar journey within your organization and ask yourself, what does winning look like? And what does it mean beyond just our success-driven metrics? And keep in mind, your users are not just your customers. In the case of Groupon, we have merchants. We even have employees. So thinking broadly and then thinking about what else is there to measure beyond trust. So as researchers, I hope you feel emboldened to do this work. And whether you're a qualitative or a quantitative researcher, hopefully we've demystified this process. And we've shown you a way that you can collaborate with each other, as we sometimes get into our own camps unnecessarily. And then the next step, of course, is really pushing the envelope on winning and what that means and trying to embed that into the culture and the strategy of your organization. So first, you might start by talking to our key partners, the ones we work with the most, designers, of course, as well as product and even market research. And by having those conversations, you might discover that there is other data out there we would want to converge with trust. But don't just stop with the people that are the most obvious and relevant. Talk to everyone in your organization, I do mean everyone, because you might find that there are other metrics out there that you're completely unaware of that are important and might relate to your measure as well. Also, that's how you change the culture, right? So my goal is that we are presenting this work as broadly as possible. I hope to see it in one day in our town hall meetings, just like we report on the financial health of our company periodically. We could report on sort of the relationship health of our company as well. And this is really going to give us the ammunition to always boldly advocate for a user, even when there seems to be some short-term financial gain or loss. So hopefully everyone is charged up to do that. And before we take questions, I feel like we have to acknowledge our amazing collaborators, Drs. Nolan and Carter, and two grad students, Megan Lowry and Kate Connolly, who helped us with the statistical analysis. Thank you.